number 1 for today's video. Let's learn the official rules of softball. So, sa softball, there are 12 rules. So, in rule number 1, the definition. So, bago tayo makakapaglaro ng softball, kailangan talaga natin malaman ang definitions ng terms. In softball, there are 12 rules. So, in every rule, meron siyang composed siya ng sections. So, in rule number 1 is composed of 105 sections or section 1 to 105 sections. So, ang rule number 1 is the definitions. Before makakapaglaro tayo ng softball, kailangan talaga natin malaman ang mga definitions ng terms. So let's start with the rule number 1 and section 1, the altered bat. So when we say altered bat, it is altered bat. A bat is altered when the physical structure of a legal bat has been changed. Examples of altering a bat are replacing the handle of a metal bat with a wooden or other type. Next is inserting material inside the bat. Next is applying excessive tape, more than 2 layers, to the bat grip or painting a bat at the top of the bottom for other than identification purposes. Replacing the grip with another legal grip is not considered as altering the bat. So, a flare or cone grip attached to the bat is considered an altered bat. So, when we say altered bat, kapag may nagbago sa structure ng bat natin. So, something is changed. And then, first is that replacing the handle. Next, inserting the materials sa bat. Next is more than 2 layer ng tape ang inilagay sa bat. And then, using a flare or cone. So, yun ang ma-identify mo siya ng altered bat or altering the bat kapag yung physical structure ng bat ay nagbago. So, let's move on to the rule number 1, section 2. So, section 2 is the appeal play. So, when we say appeal play, a live or dead ball appeal is a play or situation on which an umpire cannot make a decision unless requested by a manager, coach, or player of the non-offending team. So, ang appeal play naman is yung kapag magiging appeal play lang siya kapag yung coach or manager makastep doon sa playing field, or a coach or manager may only make a dead ball appeal after stepping on the playing field. So that is section 2, appeal play. Next, section 3 or rule number 1, section 3, ball compression. So when we say ball compression is the load force. So load force in kilograms to pounds required to compress a softball 6.5 mm. So, required siya na 6.5 mm or 0.25 inches when measured in accordance with the ASTM. So, when we say ASTM is the American Society for Testing and Materials. So, sila yung nag-test ng mga methods for measuring compression displacement of softballs. So, that is the ball compression section 3. So, let's move on to section 4. Rule number 1, section 4, ball core, or the coefficient of restitution of a softball when measured with the ASTM or the American Society for Testing and Materials. So, that is the test method for measuring the coefficient of restitution of softballs. So that is section 4, ball core, or the coefficient of restitution for softball. So rule number 1, let's move on to the rule number 1, section 5, baseline. So when we say baseline, baseline is a direct line between bases. So that is baseline. Let's move on to rule number 1, section 6. So section 6 is the base on balls. So when we say base on balls, it is a base on balls occurs when 4 pitches are judged by the plate umpire to be balls, including illegal pitches. The batter is awarded first base. This is sometimes referred to as a walk. FP, the ball is alive, or SP, the ball is dead. So when we say FP, it is the fast pitch, and when we say SP, it is a slow pitch. So that is the rule number 1, section 6. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 7, the base path. So when we say base path, a base path is a direct line between a base and the runner's position at the time a defensive player is attempting or about to attempt to tag a runner. So that is the base path. Rule number 1, section 8. The batted ball. So when we say batted ball, is any ball that hits the ball or hits by the bat and lands either in a fair or foul territory. No intention to hit the ball is necessary. So that is rule number 1, section 8, batted ball. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 9, the batter. So when we say batter, is an offensive player who enters the batter's box with the intention of aiding his team to score runs. So he continues to be a batter until he is either declared out by the umpire or he become a batter runner. So that is rule number 1, section 9, batter. So let's move on to section number 10, batter box. So when we say batter box, is the area to which the batter is restricted while is positioned with the intention of helping his team to obtain runs. The lines are considered as being within the batter's box. So that is rule number 10, rule number 1, section 10, batter's box. So rule number 1, section 11, the batter runner. So batter runner is a player who has finished a turn at bat and then bat has not yet been put out or touched first base. So that is section 11, the batter runner. So let's move on to the section 12, the batter or the batting order. So let's move on to section number 12, the batting order. So when we say batting order, is the official listing of offensive players in the order in which members of that team must come to bat when the lineup card is submitted. It shall also include each player's position. So that is the section 12, batting order. So section 13, the black ball. So when we say black ball, is a batted, thrown, or pitched ball that A, become lodged in the fencing, or B, is touched, stopped, or handled by a person not engaged in the game, or C, touches any object that is not part of the official equipment of playing area, or D, is touched by a defensive player who is in contact with the ground that is not part of the playing area. So, a thrown ball touching a base coach accidentally in or out of the coach's box is not a black ball. So, that is rule number 1, section 13, the black ball. So, let's move on to rule number 1, section 14, the bunt, or FP only, or the fast pitch only. So, a bunt is batted ball not swing at but intentionally meet the bat and tap slowly within the playing field. So let's move on to section 15, the catch. So catch is legally caught ball which occurs when the fielder catches a batted or thrown ball within his hands or glove. So that is rule number 1, section 15, catch. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 16, the catcher's box. So when we say catcher's box, that area within which the catcher must remain until A. FP only or fast pitch, the pitch is released. The lines are to be considered within the catcher's box. B. SP only or slow pitch, the pitch ball is batted, touches ground, plate, or batter, or reaches the catcher's box. The lines are to be considered within the catcher's box. The catcher is considered within the box, except when touching the ground outside the catcher's box. So that is section 16, the catcher's box. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 17, the charge conference. So when we say charge conference, takes place when A. Offensive conference, the offensive team requests a suspension of a play or displays plays to allow the manager or other team representative to confer with any member of their team. So B. Defensive conference, the defensive team requests a suspension of play to allow a representative of the defensive team to enter the playing field to communicate with any defensive player or fielder. So note that it is not a charge conference if the coach or manager notifies the plate umpire of a change or pitchers either before or after communicating with pitcher. So that is rule number 1, section 17, the charge conference. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 18, the chop ball. So when we say chop ball, a chop hit ball is one at which the batter strikes downward with a chopping motion of the bat so that the ball bounces high into the air. So that is section 18, chop ball. So section 19, the coach. Coach is a person who is responsible for the team's actions on the field, and he represents the team in communications with the umpire and opposing team. A player may be designated as a coach in the event if the coach is absent. So, or the player is playing coach. So, let's move on to section 20, or the crow hop. FP only or the fast pitch only. So, a crow hop is defined as the act of a pitcher who does not push off from the pitcher's place to deliver the ball. So this is an illegal act. If the player steps off the pitcher's place, thereby establishing a second impetus or starting point, and then pushes off from the new starting point and completes the delivery. So that is rule number 1, section 20, the crow hop. So let's move on to section 21, the dead ball. So when we say dead ball, or a dead ball is one that touches touches any object that is not part of the official equipment or official playing area, or a player, person not engaged in the game. Or B, lodges in the umpire's gear. So B, lodges in the umpire's gear or in an offensive player's clothing. Or C, the umpire has ruled dead. So that is section 21, dead ball. So let's move on to section 22, defensive team. So the defensive team is the team in field. So when we say defensive team, yun yung mga defensive team. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 23. So section 23 is the delayed dead ball. So when we say a delayed dead ball is a game situation in which the ball remains alive until the conclusion of a play. So when the entire play is completed, rather, if required, the umpire shall rule a dead ball and enforce the appropriate ruling. So Section 23, delayed dead ball. So let's move on to Section 24, designated player, DP, FP, OD. So the designated player is starting offensive player who bats in the lineup for the flex player listed in the 10th position of the lineup card. So that is Section 24, designated player. So let's move on to Section 25, the dislodge base. So when we say dislodge base, is a base displaced from its proper position. So Section 26, double play. A double play is a play by the defense in which the offensive players are legally put out as the result of continuous action. So that is rule number 1, Section 26. So let's move on to rule number 1, Section 27. Section 27 is a dugout. The dugout is an area in dead ball territory designated for players, coaches, bat boys or girls, and official representatives of team only. There shall be no smoking in this area. So that is Section 27. So Section 28, ejection from the game. So ejection is the act of any umpire ordering a play, official, or any team member to leave the game and the grounds of a rule violation for the remainder of the game. So that is Rule 1, Section 28, ejection from the game. So let's move on to Rule number 1, Section 29, the fair ball. So a fair ball is legally batted ball which A, settles or in touch on over fair territory between home first base or between home and third base. So note, a fair fly shall be judged according to the related position of the ball and the foul line, including the foul pole, and not as to whether the fielder is on fair or foul territory at the time of touching the ball. So let's move on to rule number 1, Section 30. So Section 30, the fair territory. So when we say fair territory, is that part of the playing field within and including the first and third base foul lines from home base to the bottom of the extreme playing field fence and perpendicularly upwards. So that is Section 30, fair territory. So Section 31, fake tag. So when we say fake tag, is a form of obstruction on a runner while advancing or returning to a base by a fielder who is not in position of the ball that impedes the progress of the running of the runner. Rather, the runner does not have to stop or slide, merely slowly down when a fake tag is simulated would constitute obstruction. So that is Section 31, fake tag. So let's move on to Section 32, the fielder. So a fielder is any defensive player of the team on the field. So the rule number 1, Section 33, the fly ball. So when we say fly ball, is a ball, any ball batted into the air. So that is fly ball. So Section 34, flex play. The flex play is the starting player for whom the designated player DPS batting and whose name appears in the 10th position of the lineup card. So that is Section 34. So let's move on to Section 35, force out. A force out is an out which can be made only when a runner loses the right to the base which he is occupying because the batter becomes a batter runner and before the batter runner or a succeeding runner has been put out. On an appeal play, the force out is determined by the force situation at the time the appeal is made, not at the time of the infraction. So that is Section 35, force out. So let's move on to Section 36, the forfeit. A forfeit is an act of the plate umpire ruling that the game is over by declaring non-offending team the winner. So that is section 36, the forfeit. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 37, the foul ball. A foul ball is a legally batted ball which A. settles on foul territory between home, first base, or between home and third base. B. bounce past first or third on the over foul territory. And C. first touches on the foul territory beyond first or third base. So note that a foul fly shall be judged according to the relative position of the ball and the foul line, including the foul pole, and not as a whether the fielder is on fair or foul territory at the time of touching the ball. So that is section 27. So section 38, the foul territory. Foul territory is any part of the playing field that is not included in fair territory. So section 39, the foul tip. A foul tip is a batted ball which A. goes directly from the bat to the catcher's hands, B. goes not higher than the batter's head, and C. is legally cuffed by the catcher. So that is section 39, the foul tip. So let's move on to the section 40, the helmet. So helmet must have 2 air flaps, one on each side, and shall be the type that has safety features equal to the greater than those provided by the full plastic cap with padding on the inside. A liner covering the ears only does not meet the rule specifications. So that is section 40, helmet. So let's move on to section 41, home team. The home team is the team on whose grounds the game is played, or if the game is played on neutral ground. The home team shall be designated by mutual agreement or by a flip of a coin. The home team shall be the third base, tag out, and play defense first. So that is rule number 1, section 41, the home team. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 42, the illegal bat. So an illegal bat is one that does not meet the requirements of rule number 3, section 1. So that is the section 42, illegal bat. Let's move on to section 43, the illegal extra player, SP only. An illegal extra player is one who violates any of the provisions of rule number 4, section 6. So next is section 44, illegal pitcher. An illegal pitcher is a player legally in the game but one who may not pitch as results of A. being removed from the pitching position by the umpire as a result of the defensive charge conference limit being exceeded, or SP only, being removed from the pitching position by the umpire as a result of pitching with excessive speed after warning. So that is rule number 1, section 44, illegal pitcher. So let's move on to section 45, the illegal player. An illegal player is a player, a player who takes a position in the lineup either on offense or defense, who has not reported to the plate umpire. B. A player who takes a position on offense or defense who does not have a legal right to the position. So that is section 45, illegal play. So section 46, illegal re-entry. An illegal re-entry occurs when a starting player turns to the game a second time after twice being substituted. B. A starting player returns to the game after being substituted but not in his original position in the offensive lineup. So C. A substitute who has legally been in the game returns to the game after being substituted. So let's move on to section 47, illegal substitute. So when we say illegal substitute is a player who has entered the game without being announced to the umpire. He may be a substitute who has not previously been in the game, or being an illegal player. C. A declared ineligible player. D. An illegal re-entry or an illegal DP or flex player. So that is section 47, illegal substitute. So let's move on to section 48, illegal batted ball. So when we say illegal batted ball, occurs when the batter hits the ball fair or foul. So A. While his entire foot is completely out of the batter's box on the ground when he makes contact with the ball. B. While any part of the batter's foot is touching home plate when he makes contact with the ball. C. While contacting the ball with an illegal, non-approved, or altered bat. D. After he steps with either foot entire out of the batter's box and then returns and makes contact with the ball while within the batter's box. So that is section 48, illegal batted ball. So let's move on to section 49, illegally cuffed ball. So when we say illegally cuffed ball occurs when a fielder catches a batted, thrown, or pitched ball when his cap, mask, glove, or any part of his uniform while it is detached from its proper place. So that is section 49, illegal cuffed ball. So let's move on to section 50, the ineligible player. So an ineligible player is a player who may no longer legally participated in the game because the umpire has removed him. Rather, an ineligible player may no longer participate as a player but may continue in the game as a coach. So that is section 50. So section 51, ineligible replacement player. Player is a player. Section 51, ineligible replacement player. So an ineligible replacement player is a player who may not enter the game to replace a player who must leave the game to attend to an injury that has caused bleeding. An eligible player replacement is one who has been removed from the game by the umpire for a violation of the rules. B. Is in the current lineup. C. Is not in the current lineup but eligible to re-enter the game. So that is section 51. Section 52, in flight. In flight describes any batted, thrown, or pitched ball that has not yet touched the ground or some object other than a fielder. So that is section 52, in flight. So let's move on to section 53, in Jupuri. The infield is that portion of the field in fair territory that includes areas normally covered by infielders. So that is section 54, infield. So let's move on to section 55, the infielder. An infielder is a defensive player including the pitcher and catcher. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 55. So the infielder. An infielder is a defensive player including the pitcher and catcher who is generally positioned anywhere near or within the lines of the base spots forming fair territory. A player who normally plays in the outfield may be considered an infielder if he moves into the area normally covered by infielder. So So that is section 55, infielder. So let's move on to section 56, the infield fly. An infield fly is a fly ball not including a line drive or attempted bunt that can be caught by an infielder with ordinary effort when first and second or first, second, and third bases are occupied before two are out. The pitcher, catcher, and any outfielder that positions himself in the infield on the play shall be considered infielders. So that is section 40. So that is section 56, the infield fly. Let's move on to section 57, the inning. An inning is that portion of the game within which the teams alternate on offense and defense, and in which there are 3 outs of each team. A new inning begins immediately after the final out of the previous inning. So let's move on to section 58, intentional base on balls. An intentional base on balls occurs when the defensive team desires to place the batter on first base without the requirement to deliver 4 pitch balls. This is referred to as an intentional walk. The ball is dead. So that is section 58. So section 59, intentionally dropped fly ball. An intentionally dropped fly ball is a fair fly ball including the line drive or a bunt with less than 2 outs and a runner on the first base, which can be caught by an infielder with ordinary effort, and the infielder intentionally drops after it is controlled with a hand or a glove. A drop ball or a fly ball allowed to bounce shall not be considered as having been intentionally dropped. So that is section 56, intentionally dropped fly ball. Let's move on to section 60, the inference. An inference is the act of an offensive player or team member that impedes, hinders, or confuses a defending player attempting to execute a play. B. An umpire who impedes a catcher's attempt to throw out a runner who is off the base. C. An umpire or runner being hit with a fair batted ball prior to passing an infielder, including the pitcher. Lastly, a spectator who reaches into the playing field and impedes the fielder playing the ball or makes contact with the ball that a fielder is attempting a play on. So let's move on to section 61, leaping. FP on leap. Leaping is the act of pitcher that causes him to airborne on his initial move and pushed from the pitcher's plate. The momentum built by the forward movement of the pitcher causes the entire body, including both pivot and stepping non-pivot foot, to be in the air of the same time and moving towards home plate. The pitch is completely dead when the pitcher lands and with continuous motion delivers the ball to the plate. The pivot foot may push off and or follow through with his continuous action. Leaping is a legal act. So that is section 61. So let's move on to section 62. The rule number 1, section 62. The legal touch or tag. A legal touch or tag is an action of a fielder in touching or tagging a batter runner, a runner who is not in contact with the base with the ball securing held in the hands or glove. The ball is not considered as having been securely held if it is juggled or trapped by the fielder after touching or tagging the batter, runner unless the player deliberately knocks the ball from the hands or glove of the fielder. So that is section 62. Let's move on to section 63, the legally cuffed ball. A legally cuffed ball occurs when a fielder catches a batted, thrown, or pitched ball provided it is not cuffed in the fielder's cap, helmet, mask, protector, pocket, or other part of his uniform. It must be cuffed, firmly held in the hands or glove. So that is section 63. Let's move on to section 64, the line drive. A line drive is a ball flight that is batted sharply and directly into the playing field. So that is section 64, the line drive. Let's move on to section 65, line up and line up card. A lineup is a list of players who are currently involved playing offensive and defensive position in the game, including the DP and selects player, FP only and EP, SP only if being used. So that is section 65. Let's move on to section 66, the obstruction. Obstruction is the act of a defensive player or team member who hinders or prevents a batter from striking or hitting the pitch ball. B. A fielder who impedes the progress of a batter runner who is legally running. So that is section 66. So let's move on to section 67, the offensive player only. FP only. An offensive player only is a player in the batting order other than the flex or whom the DP is playing defense. The OPO continues the playing offense but not play defense. So that is section 67. Section 68 is offensive team. The offensive team is a team at bat. So section 69, official equipment. Official equipment is considered to be any equipment, bats, gloves, helmets, etc. is in current use by the defensive or offensive team in the course of play. Defensive equipment, gloves are, for example, left on the field by the team playing offensive. Playing offense would not be considered as official equipment. So that is section 69, official equipment. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 70, on-deck batter. When we say on-deck batter, is the offensive player whose name follows the name of the batter in the batting order. So that is section 70. Section 71 is on-deck circle. The on-deck circle is that area where the on-deck batter may warm up or takes practice swings while waiting his turn to enter the batter's box. So that is section 71. Let's move on to section 72, 1 meter, 3-foot line. The 1 meter, 3-foot line is area the last distance between home and first base, where a runner must run to avoid being bowled out interfering with the thrown ball from at home plate area, or which fielders attempt to take such as throw while running or first base. So that is section 72, 1 meter or 3-foot line. Let's move on to section 73, the option play. An option play is a play in which the offensive coach or manager is given the choice or taking the enforcement of the illegal action or the result of the play. Such options include A. Catcher obstruction, B. Use of an illegal glove, C. An illegal substitution, C. An illegal substitution, D. An illegal pitch, E. An illegal pitcher return to game and pitching, and last, a female batter on a 2-out walk. So that is section 73, option play. So let's move on to section 74, outfield. The outfield is that portion of the field that is outside the diamond formed by the baselines of the area not normally covered by an infielder and within the foul lines beyond first and third bases and boundaries of the ground. So that is section 74, outfield. So let's move on to section 75, the overslide. An overslide is the act of an offensive player when, as a runner, he overslides a base he is attempting to reach. It is usually caused when his momentum causes him to lose contact with the base, which then causes him to be jeoparded or jeoparding runner. The batter runner may overslide first base without being in jeopardy, provided two immediately returns to the base. So that is section 75, the overslide. So let's move on to section 76, the overthrow. An overthrow is a play in which a ball is thrown from one fielder to another, resulting in the ball A. going beyond the boundary lines of the playing field, or B. becoming blocked. So that is section 76. So let's move on to section 77, passed ball. FP only. A passed ball is a pitch that should have been held or controlled by the catcher with ordinary effort. So section 78, pitch. A pitch is an act performed by the pitcher in delivering the ball to the batter. So section 79, pitcher's circle. FP only. The pitcher's circle is an area within 2.44 meter or 8 feet of the pitcher's plate. The lines are considered within the circle. So that is section 79. So let's move on to section 80, pivot foot. The pivot foot. The pivot foot is that foot, FP only, with which the pitcher pushes off the pitcher's plate. B, SP only, which when placed in contact with the pitcher's plate by the pitcher must remain in contact with the pitcher's plate until the pitcher's ball is released. So that is section 80. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 81. The play ball. Play ball is the team used by the plate umpire to indicate the play shall begin or be resumed when the pitcher holds the ball. And A, FP only is within the pitcher's circle. B, SP only is on the near the pitcher's plate. So let's move on to section 82, pre-game meeting. The pre-game meeting is a meeting held at the home plate area at the predetermined time between the umpires and the head coaches, managers, or team representatives of the respective teams. This meeting is held to A, confirm and approve the lineups of each team and distribute a copy of the opposition, and B, review any special ground rules that may be applicable. So that is section 82. Let's move on to section 83, the protest. A protest, separate from an appeal, is the action of defensive or offensive team objecting to A, the interpretation or application of a playing rule by an umpire, or the eligibility of a team roster member. So that is section 83, the protest. Section 84, quick return pitch, is one made by the pitcher with the obvious attempt to catch the batter off balance. This would be before the batter takes his desired position in the batter's box or while he is still on balance as a result of a previous pitch. So that is section 84. Section 85, re-entry. Re-entry is the act of any of the starting players returning to the game after being legally or illegally substituted. So section 86, removal from the game. Removal is the act of umpire declaring a player ineligible for further participation in the game, other than as a coach as a result of an infraction of the rules. So that is section 86. Let's move on to rule number 1, section 87. Replacement of the player or replacement player. A Replacement player is a player required to enter the game for a defined period of time to replace a player who must leave the game to attend to an injury that is causing bleeding. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 88. Section 88, the runner. A runner is a player of the team at the bat who has finished a turn at bat, reached first base, and has not yet been put out. So that is section 88, the runner. Section 89, slap hit, FP only. A slap hit is a batted ball that has been struck with a controlled short chopping motion rather than with a full swing. The two most common types of slap hit are those in which the batter takes his stances as if it to bunt, but then either drives the ball into the ground with a quick short swing or punch hits the ball over the infield. So B, the running steps within the batter's box toward the pitcher before making contact with the pitcher with the quick short swing or punch hits the ball over the infield. So note, a slap hit is not considered to be a bunt. So let's move on to section 90, squeeze play, FP only. A squeeze play is a play in which the offensive team with a runner on the third base attempts to score that runner by means of the batter contacting the ball. So that is section 90. So let's move on to section 91, the starting players. Starting players are the players listed on the official lineup given to the umpire-in-chief and or the plate umpire. So that is section 91. So let's move on to section 92, stealing. Stealing is the act of the runner attempting to advance during or after a pitch to the batter. Stealing is not allowed in slow pitch. So let's move on to section 93, strike zone. A, FP only, the strike zone is the space over any part of the home plate between the batter's umpires or armpits rather and the top of his knees when he assumes his natural batting stance. Next, B, SP only. The strike zone is that space over any part of the home plate that is between the batter's back shoulder and his knees when he assumes his natural batting stance. So that is rule number 1, section 93. So let's move on to rule number 1, section 94. The substitute. A substitute is a player listed on the official lineup card who is A, non-starting player who has not been in the game other than a replacement player. B, starting back, a starting player who has left the game once and who may legally return to the lineup. So that is section 94, substitute. Let's move on to rule number 1, section 95, the tagging up. Tagging up is the action of running, or it is the action of a runner returning to his base or remaining on his base before he legally advances on a batted fly ball that is first touched by a fielder, not to be confused with the action of fielder tagging a base of a runner. So that is section 95. So section 96 is the team member. A team member or a team member includes any person authorized to sit on the team bench. So that is section 96. Let's move on to rule number 1, section 97. Temporary runner, FP only. The temporary runner is a player who may run for the catcher or record for the preceding half inning, who is now on the base with 2 out. The use of the temporary runner is optional for the offensive coach. The temporary runner must be the player who the time of taking the option is scheduled to bat last and is not on the base at the time the option is taken. So that is section 97. Let's move on to section 98, the throw. Time. So the throw. A throw is the act performed by a fielder when throwing the ball to another fielder. That is section 98, throw. Let's move on to section 99, time. Time is term used by the umpire to order the suspension of the play during which the ball is dead. So that is section 99, time. Let's move on to rule number 1, section 100. Section 100 is the trap ball. A trap ball is A legally batted fly ball or line drive that hits the ground or a fence prior to being cuffed, or B a legally batted fly ball that is cuffed against the fence with the glove or bare hand, or C a thrown ball to any base for the force out which is cuffed with the glove over the ball on the ground rather than under the ball, or D FP only, a pitch ball that touches the ground on a strike prior to the catcher catching it. So that is section 100, trap ball. So let's move on to section 101, the triple play. A triple play is continuous action play by the defense on which 3 offensive players are put out. So that is section 101. Let's move on to section 102, the turn at bat. A turn at bat begins when a player first enters the batter's box and continues until the batter is put out or become a batter runner. So that is section 102. Let's move on to section 103, wild pitch, FP only. A wild pitch is a pitch so high, so low, or so wide of the plate that the catcher cannot or does not stop and control it with ordinary effort. That is section 101. Let's move on to section 104, the wild throw. A wild throw is a play in which a ball is thrown from one fielder to another and cannot be cuffed or controlled, is not blocked, and remains in play. So that is section 104, wild play. So let's move on to the last section of the rule number 1, section 105, the withdrawn player. A withdrawn player is a player forced to leave the game lined up in accordance with the replacement player ruling. So that's the end of the section or the rule number 1, sections 105. Section 1 to 105. So let's move on to rule number 2, the playing field. So rule number 2 is composed of 4 sections. So let's start with section 1. Section 1 is the playing field. Playing field is an area within which the ball may be legally played and fielded. Note that a ball is considered outside the playing field when it touches the ground, person on the ground, or object outside the playing area. B shall have a clear and unobstructed area within the minimum radius as set out in the distance table. Appendix 2. Makikita natin ito sa Appendix 2 ng official rules. From home plate between the foul lines. So C shall have an obstructed area outside the foul lines and between home plate and the backstop as shown in the diagram in Appendix 1. Or D should have a warning track. If a warning track is used, it shall be an area within playing field and adjacent to any permanent fence along the outfield and side boundaries. So that is rule number 2, section 1. So let's move on to rule number 2, section 2. Ground or special rules. Ground or special rules establishing the limits of the playing field may be agreed upon the leagues or opposing teams. Whenever backstops, fencing, or fences rather, stands, vehicles, spectators, or other obstructions are within the prescribed area. So that is rule number 2, section 2, ground or special rules. Let's move on to rule number 2, section 3. The official diamond shall have baselines and pitching distance as set out in the distance table. Note that if during the game, the base distance or the pitching distance is found to be at the wrong distance, correct the error at the start of the next field or full inning and continue playing the game. So that is section 3. So let's move on to the last section. Section 4, diamond layout. So for the layout of diamond, refer to the drawing showing official dimensions of softball diamond in Appendix 1 and detailed instruction to layout. So section 4, diamond layout. So the 1 meter 3 feet line is drawn parallel to from the baseline starting at a point halfway between home plate and first base. B. The batter's on deck circle is placed adjacent to the end of player's bench or dugout area close to or closest to home plate. So C. The batter's box are located on each side of home plate. The lines are considered as being within the batter's box. B. The catcher's box shall be located to the rear of the batter's boxes. E. Each coach's box is parallel to each third baseline extended from the bases toward the home plate. F. The home plate shall be made of rubber and shall be a 5-sided figure. The sides shall be parallel to inside lines of the batter's box. G. The pitcher's plate shall be of rubber. So that is section 4, diamond layout. So note that the double base is approved for use at first base. This base shall be of the dimension set of and made canvas or the suitable different material. Half base is secured in territory and half base of the different solid construction color is secured in foul territory. So that is the rule number 2, the playing field. So there are 4 sections. So now let's move on to rule number 3, the equipment. So rule number 3, there are 9 sections. So let's start with section 1, the official bat. So the official bat shall be one-piece construction, multi-piece, permanently assembled, or two-piece interchangeable construction. If the bat is designed with interchangeable components, it must meet the following criteria. So first, matting components must have unique locking key to prevent uncertified equipment combinations in the field. Second, all component combinations must meet the same standards as if it were one piece but when combined or a portion of one piece but is separated. So B shall be made of one piece of hardwood or formed from a block of wood consisting of 2 or more pieces of wood banded together with an adhesive in such a way that the grain direction of all pieces is parallel to length of the bat. So that is section 1, the official bat. So note that tape applied to any bat must be continuously spiral. It does not have to be a solid layer of tape. It shall not exceed 2 layers. So that is rule number 3, section 1, the official bat. So let's move on to rule number 3, section 2, the warm-up or the warm-up bats. So the warm-up bat must be one-piece construction and it shall comply with the safety grip and safety knob requirements of the official bat. It must be marked warm up in 3.2 cm or 1 1/4 inches. Letters on the barrel end. The barrel end must be in excess of 5.7 centimeter or 2 and 1/4 inches. So that is rule number 3, section 2, warm up bats. So let's move on to rule number 3, section 3, the official softball. So the official softball, A, shall be a regular, smooth seamed, concealed stitch or flat surfaced ball. B, shall have a center core made of either number 1 quality long fiber kapok, a mixture of cork and rubber, a polyurethane mixture or other materials approved by the ISF Equipment Standards Commissions. So may be hand or machine wound with a fine quality twisted yarn and covered with latex or rubber cement. D, shall have a cover cemented to the ball by application of cement to underside of the cover and sewn with wax thread of cotton or line, or shall have a molded cover banded to the core or molded integrally with the core and have authentic facsimile of stitching as may be approved by ISF Equipment Standards Commission. So that is rule number 3, section 3, the official softball. So let's move on to rule number 3, section 4, gloves and mitts or MITTS. Any player may wear a glove, but only the catcher and first baseman of use mitts. A, no top lacing, webbing or other device between the thumb and a body of the glove or mitt worn by the first baseman of or catcher, or the glove worn by any fielder shall be more than 12.7 cm or 5 inches in length. So B, the pitcher's glove may be any combinations of colors provided none of the colors including the lacing or the color of the ball. Gloves worn by any player other than the pitcher may be any combinations of colors. So C, gloves with white, gray, or yellow optic circles in the outside giving appearance of the ball are illegal for all players. So that is rule number 3, section 4, gloves and mitts. So let's move on to rule number 3, section 5, the shoes. So all team members must wear shoes. Siyempre, kailangan kapag naglalaro tayo, kailangan ng shoes. A shoe shall be considered official if it is made with either canvas or leather uppers or similar material and is fully enclosed. So A, the soles may be either smooth or have soft or hard rubber cleats. B, ordinary metal sole and heel plates may be used if it is spikes of the plates do not extend more than 1.9 cm or 3/4 inch. 1.9 cm or 3/4 inches from the sole of or heel of the shoe. Shoes with rounded metal spikes are illegal. So that is rule number 3, section 5, the shoes. So let's move on to rule number 3, section 6, protective equipment. So A, must. FP only. All catchers must wear mask, throat protector, and helmet. So note, catchers or the members of the defensive team must wear a mask, throat protector, and helmet while receiving warm-up pitches from the pitching plate or in the warm-up area. If the person catching the pitch will not wear the mask, he must be replaced by a person who will do so. An extended wire protection attached to the mask can be worn in lieu of the throat protector. Note that fast-pitch catchers cannot wear the plastic face mask or guard in place of regular mask with throat protector. So that is section 3. That is rule number 3, section 6. So let's move on to rule number 3, section 7. The equipment on playing field. So equipment that is not part of the official equipment shall not be left lying on the playing field in either fair or foul territory. Effect of section 7 is the ball is dead if it is contacts equipment that is not part of the official equipment. So that is rule number 3, section 7, equipment on playing field. Let's move on to rule number 3, section 8, the uniform. So all players on a team shall wear uniforms alike in color, trim, and style. Reference to coach's uniform is found under rule number 4, section 1B. So the exception is that players and coaches may, or for religious reasons, permitted to wear specific head covering and apparel that does not conform to standard uniform requirements without penalty. So that is rule number 3, section 8. Let's move on to rule number 3, section 9, all equipment. So, all equipment, notwithstanding the foregoing, the ISF reserves the right to withhold and withdraw approval of any equipment which, in the ISF's sole determination, significantly changes the character of the game, affects the safety of participants or spectators, or renders a player's performance more a product of his equipment rather than his individual skill. So, that is rule number 3, section 9, all equipment. So, let's move on to rule number 4, coaches, players, and substitutes. So, rule number 4. So, there are 12 sections in rule number 4. So, let's start with section 1, the coaches. So, A, the head coach is responsible for signing the lineup card. Coaches must be neatly attired, including the wearing of suitable footwear or dressed in team uniform in accordance with the color code of the team. So that is section 1, coaches. Let's move on to section 2, lineup cards and rosters. So A, official lineup cards are to be completed, the submitted of the official scorer and the plate umpire at the start of each game. The plate umpire retains the card for the duration of the game. So that is section number 2, lineup cards and rosters. So let's move on to rule number 4, section 3, the players. So a team shall consist of players in the following positions: fast pitch, 9 players, pitcher F1, catcher F2, first baseman F3, second baseman F4, third baseman F5, shortstop F6, left fielder F7, center fielder F8, and right fielder F9. So, fast pitch with a designated player DP, 10 players, same as fast pitch plus a DP. So, in slow pitch, 10 players, pitcher F1, catcher F2, first baseman F3, second baseman F4, third baseman F5, shortstop F6, left fielder F7, left center fielder F8, right fielder F9, and right center fielder F10. So slow pitch with an extra player EP, 11 players, same as slow pitch plus 1 EP who bats in the lineup. So let's move on to rule number 4, section 4, starting players. The starting player shall be official when the lineup card is inspected and approved by the plate umpire and team representative at the pre-game meeting. So the names may be entered on the official lineup card in advance of this meeting. So that is section 4, starting players. Let's move on to rule number 4, section 5, designated player, FP only. A designated player, referred to as DP, may be used as a batter for any defensive playing, provided it is made known prior to the start of the game and his name is centered on the lineup sheet as one of the 9 hitters in the batting order. So that is rule number 4, section 5. Section 5, designated player, FP only. So note that when the flex player plays offense for the designated player, the designated player is now considered to have left the game and may re-enter once in his place in the batting order. So this change must be reported to the plate umpire. So that is section 5. Let's move on to section 6, extra player, SP only. An extra player, referred to as EP, it is optional, but if one is used, it must be made known prior to the start of the game, and the player's name listed on the lineup card as one of the 11 hitters in the batting order. So note that failure to complete the game with an EP result is or in forfeiture of the game. So that is rule number 4, section 6, extra player, SP only. So let's move on to rule number 4, section 7, 3 and 3. Any of the starting players may be substituted and re-enter once, provided such players occupy the same batting position whether they are in the lineup. Exception: if the starting player currently not in the lineup or brought onto the lineup as a replacement player. So the original player and the substitutes cannot be in the lineup at the same time. So that is rule number 4, section 7, 3 and 3. So let's move on to rule number 4, section 8, the substitutes or the illegal player. A substitute may take the place of a player whose name in his team's lineup. The following regulations govern player substitution. So, the coach of the team, representative of the team making the substitution, shall immediately notify the plate umpire of the time and substitute entered. So that is rule number 4, section 8, substitutes or the illegal player. On to rule number 4, section 9. So the disputed calls. Any team member disputing any judgment decisions by an umpire will constitute a team warning. Any repeat offense shall result in the ejection of the team member. So that is rule number 4, section 9, disputed calls. So let's move on to rule number 4, section 10, dugout conduct. So a coaches, player, substitute, or the other bench personnel shall not be outside the designated dugout area, except when the rules allow or when considered justified by the umpire. Note that this includes players other than the on-deck batter who must remain in the on-deck circle at the start of the game, between innings, or when the pitcher is warming up. So B, there shall be no smoking in this designated dugout area. So that is rule number 4, section 10, dugout conduct. Let's move on to rule number 4, section 11, the replacement player. In the event of any player bleeding during the game, the player must be withdrawn from the game if this bleeding cannot be stopped within a reasonable length of the game, or his uniform becomes covered with blood. The withdrawn player shall not return to the game until the bleeding ceases, the injury cleaned and covered, and if necessary, his uniform replaced. So that is rule number 4, section 11, the replacement player. Let's move on to section 12, temporary runner. FP only. A temporary runner is legal for a catcher or record from the previous half inning who is on the base with 2 out. The following provisions apply. A. It is optional for the offense team manager. B. The temporary runner may be used anytime after the second out occurred. And C. The temporary runner is in the player scheduled to bat last and who is not on base at the time the option is taken. So note that if an incorrect player is used as a temporary runner, the error shall be corrected when noticed without penalty. So that is rule number 4, section 12. Let's move on to rule number 4, section 13. Violations and penalties. So team members shall not make disparaging or insulting remarks to or about opposing players, officials, or spectators, or commit other acts that could be considered unsportsmanlike conduct. So B. The penalty for violations by a team member shall be A. For all first offense, the offender may be warned. So second, for a second offense, or if a first offense is considered serious enough by the umpire, the offender is ejected. So note that in the event the head coach is ejected from a game, he shall submit to the umpire the game of the person who is consumed or assume that head coach duties for the remainder of the game. So that is rule number 4, section 13, the violations and penalties. So there are 13 sections in rule number 4, coaches, players, and substitutes. So this ends our video for rule number 1 to 4, or the official rules in softball. So to be continued.